Hello friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time, and I'm here today to talk about your brake bleeder pump and cover a few of the common problems some people are having in using it. So let's start with the brake bleeder pump itself, which that is what this is. This isn't the brake bleeder, it's a brake bleeder pump. And when you're going to buy one, it's recommended you get the whole kit so you can get all the different little parts and pieces, like the short little hose and the little pieces like this. And there's a few different ways that you can use those. I've always just used the little triangular shaped or cone shaped pieces for doing the vacuum sealing, but there are some other pieces in there that you can use as well. And if you're having issues, maybe try using some of the other pieces. Now, before I go into any more of this, let me talk a little bit about the brake bleeder pumps and ones that you may have bought. Now, this is the very first one I bought, and I've had it for 4 years, and I love this thing. It's been a champ. The only thing that has happened over time is the gauge is a little off, and that's why I don't go by a specific number anymore when I'm using it to vacuum seal, but it still works great. And then I bought this second one as a backup, and you can see it looks very similar, but if you look closely, such as on the gauge, you'll see this one here has red in the gauge where this one doesn't. Now, the reason I stopped linking to this particular one was because it went out of stock in the, early spring, and nobody could find it anywhere. But there's so many more that are almost exactly the same that I just started linking to different ones. This was the second one I bought, and I linked to this one for a while, and then it went out of stock. Now, I don't know anything about the other ones as far as working with them. I was just trying to gather links to different ones. In case one went out of stock, you'd be able to find another one. And really, you can find these for a lot less money on Amazon. I'm talking half to 1/3 of the price if you get it on Amazon, rather than buying it at your local auto parts store. However, I don't know what your auto parts store carries. It may carry a higher quality brake bleeder kit than the ones you can get from Amazon. This one in general to me seems more cheaply made, even though at first glance it looks exactly the same. Just the way when I'm using it, when I'm pumping it, I notice the needle isn't always consistently moving like it should be. It kind of jumps a lot. And I'm not talking about just when using it with the chamber. You can expect that when using any brake bleeder on the chamber, when you're vacuum sealing a jar inside there, because it's doing two things. It's pulling the air out of the chamber as well as out of the jar, so it is going to bounce around a little bit. That's to be expected. But no, this does this even when I'm using the Food Saver tops. So if you get your brake bleeder pump and you can't even move that handle, I'm thinking there's got to be something wrong with it. Not unless on your particular pump there's some kind of locking mechanism that's preventing it from moving. And if you know anything about that, please share your experiences with that in the comments down below. Now, some people have found they've just, whether it be mostly when they're using the chamber is where a lot of people have problems with their brake bleeder pump. But if they're able to get any kind of vacuum on the pump at all, then that says that their pump is working, it's pulling the air out, and the chamber is well sealed as it should be. And so the problem shouldn't really be with either one of those. But then again, if it is a real chintzy one, like I say, this one is a lot more chintzy. I use them both, and they both work. But I just like the way this one feels more solid. It has just a little more weight to it as well. Now, this one has been back in stock. At least that's what it appears to be. I've gone back to, went into my orders and noticed this one's back in stock for actually $6 cheaper than what I paid for it. And I'll go ahead and link to it down below. I'm only hoping, though, it's the same one that I have here. But even if you get a more chintzy one like this, it should still be working for you. If it's not working, it could be faulty, and I recommend you sending it back. But before you do that, let's kind of go over some issues that could be causing you problems, whether it be when you're using your Food Saver tops or you're using the vacuum chamber itself. So let's start with the Food Saver tops. Now I have several different jars out here that need to be sealed. This one doesn't need to be sealed. This is already sealed. I just brought this one out as to show you. This is the one I sealed in another video, and it's still sealed, at least from the time that I shot that video. Nothing wrong with it. This is an olive jar, green olive jar. I like to get the green Spanish olives from Costco, or even the jalapeno and garlic stuffed ones. Love those things. And the jars are the same. The lids just have a little bit different look to them, but they're designed exactly the same. And these seal up very well inside the chamber, no problem, unless the lid is damaged, like the one that I dented because I dropped it and then it lost its seal and I couldn't get it sealed again because I damaged the lid. So it's still good for storing things. I'm not concerned about vacuum sealing, but I can't use it to actually vacuum seal. So this one here is full of pistachios I just got from Costco, and I'm going to be sealing this, but I can only use the chamber. I can't use these on there because these are only made to fit the Mason wide mouth and the Mason regular mouth, and that's if you can even find these anymore. There is a lady by the name of Anita. If you haven't seen her comment, hopefully she'll see this video and she'll put a comment down below if she has any available. But she had found a bunch of these and bought them up so she could make them available for people that needed them. So if she still has some available, Anita, please put your comment with your email address down below where people can contact you. And she's selling them for a good price. A really good price, a lot cheaper than what you're going to pay, especially if you go to eBay and you're paying like $50 a piece, which is absolutely outrageous. I don't recommend doing that. In fact, if you're going to do that, you'd be better off just buying the chamber where you can put wide mouth, regular mouth, or even the irregular mouth ones like this here. But I'll talk more about that in a minute because this isn't all about the chamber. This is about using the brake bleeder. So let's go over a few things. Now, when you go to seal it with the top, the Food Saver top like this, you don't have the band on there. It won't fit if you put the band on there. The Food Saver top itself will hold that lid firmly in place as you're vacuum sealing. Since I have this one set up, I'll talk about, you might see this little patch job. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But now, since I have two different methods of sealing jars, I use this one, keeping this tip in place, for sealing with the Food Saver tops like this. So one of the problems you may be having is since this doesn't snap into place, like your Food Saver hose right here. It's actually, if it looks like this, it's the gray end that goes to the Food Saver top. Okay, and I'm going to demonstrate that in a minute. But if you're using whatever tip comes with your brake bleeder hose, it'll work. The difference is with this, you can press it in there and it will stay in place and you don't have to hold it. But with this, you actually have to hold it in place and hold it firmly. It doesn't mean you have to press down with all of your might, but hold it firmly in place and press down a little bit. Keep it totally vertical. Don't let it go off to the side at all. Or if it's tilted a little bit, it's not going to work. It's got to get to where it can actually pull the air out of that jar. And then simply just start pumping this up. And you'll notice this is the cheaper one, where you'll see that needle kind of bounce around a little more, but it still works. I find with this, I have to actually press a little harder though into the lid, and even with this hose patch together, it's still working, but I keep pumping until it doesn't get any higher. And if you see it's like wanting to drop down, press even harder into the lid with your the tip of your hose. Okay, that should have done it right there. So I don't concern myself about the number, I just look at how it's moving, and yep, it's sealed. And then just in case maybe you didn't get a tight seal on it, it's a good idea to leave it out for a couple days so you can see it and then check it. But even if you have to get it off your counter and put it away, write yourself a note to go check all the jars that you sealed that day and make sure that they're still sealed. Now, honestly, when it comes to a lot of your herbs, as long as they're really dry, there's very little need, if any at all, to vacuum seal your herbs. They're going to keep for years as long as you just put the lid on tight. Whether it be in a jar like this, like the one that I have like this that's not sealing anymore because of the dent. I have some dried marshmallow root. I just have the lid on there nice and tight and I'm not worried about it. A lot of that stuff will keep really well for a very long time. Now, when you're talking about fruits, vegetables, nuts, and meats, then I recommend that you vacuum seal it. It's going to keep these things far more fresh and prevent them from going stale, and some of them even from possibly getting moldy if you vacuum seal. And here's another question I'm going to answer real quick. Whether or not you choose to use an oxygen absorber, that's up to you. Some people say you should still use it even when you're vacuum sealing. Personally, I see no point in it. I've never seen a need for it, and I've been vacuum sealing into jars for probably about 5 years. No issues. I've had things like, such as this jerky from 2016. This is elk jerky, and it's vacuum sealed, it's still sealed, and it's still good. Any of this white stuff you see in there, that is not mold. It is the fat from the meat, and it's not rancid. I know because I recently opened a jar like this that I think was from 2015, and it was still good. It still tasted as good as the day I made it up and jarred it up, because I do make my own beef jerky and elk jerky. I do have a couple of really old videos on making the jerkies. So anyway, same thing with this. This says apricots because I'm recycling the lid. I never try to, when I'm washing these lids, I just wash with soap water and a dish rag, a soft dish rag. I never try to scrub off the permanent ink with any kind of scrubber because it creates little micro scratches, so that when you go to reuse the lid, each time you reuse it, it makes the ink much harder to get off. I don't bother removing that ink until after I've used it to seal something else with. For this one, I'm going to go ahead and use the chamber, and in that situation, some people who might be having problems with their mason jars, it could be on how tight they're putting on the band. And when you're using the chambers, it doesn't matter if it's the one you get from us or one that you buy from, you know, the Food Saver ones, just put your band on about that tight. I was saying before, maybe a little bit tighter than that, but I say about the same as you would if you're putting it on a Tatler or Harvest Guard lid. Just put the band on until the jar turns freely. What that's going to do is hold the lid in place, whereas when you're using this, it already holds the lid snugly in place. But when you're using the chamber, you don't have, if you just stick it in there like that, there's nothing to hold the lid firmly in place, so you need the band. But you don't want to wrench it down like you would a metal lid for when you're pressure canning or water bath canning, because the first thing that's gonna happen is if you have this on tight, you're gonna pump this up until the needle stops moving. But what's going to happen is, because this is on so tight, by the time you go to take that lid off of the chamber itself, a lot of the air will have finally had time to come out from under the lid, and it's not going to seal. So even if you just sat there and waited and you watched that and didn't undo anything, you'll watch that needle kind of go back down. That's the air coming out of the jar into the chamber. And so if that's doing that and you're having to keep pumping it up, then what you need to do is take your jar out and loosen that band. I say take it all the way off and then put it on like this. And then you should have it right. Now let's go ahead and give this a try. Now obviously, since I'm using the brake bleeder pump, I'm using the chamber that has the fitting, which is, I'm calling the 10mm, which should fit to most brake bleeder hoses. One of the other issues some people may be having with their hose is it might be just a little bit bigger than the standard. Most of your brake bleeder hoses are the same size, but they can be just slightly different, and that can cause the hose to be a little bit too loose. Now my old one is, I looked at the whole thing, it is just slightly bigger than the new one. The new one actually fits onto the chamber, onto this fitting, better than this one does. But even though this one's just slightly looser, it still works just fine for me. And so that's why I don't have a tip on there, because this is the one I use for the chamber. Make sure you tilt your chamber and put your jar in gently like that. You don't want to put it on the counter and just drop the jar in. Obviously, you can break your jar. You're going to take your lid, and here's another issue I want to cover on this lid since I'm here, is if your lid, I got to noticing that some of them when we get them in are cockeyed like this. So make sure you loosen up this wing nut, move it around so that it's level, and then put that wing nut down until it's holding it all in place. Then put that in there, and then just tighten this down as far as you can get it until you're able to see it feels like it's on there, but it's not quite. See, I try to pick this whole thing up and it comes out. That shows that I'm not getting it tight enough. So that could be another issue. Again, I have a whole video where I did just on some of the problems people are having with the chamber. So, but make sure you tighten that down until you can pick the whole thing up from the wing nut without the lid slipping off. Then you know you've got a good seal on it. So I just slipped that on there. You don't have to push it on all the way. Now remember, this one is a little looser, so I do push this one on farther than I do this one. You really only have to push it up just a little bit past or right at the edge of the first barb. And you can look in this picture here that both of the fittings, the one that fits to the Food Saver hose and the one that fits to the brake bleeder hose, they both have little barbs on them. And if it's a nice snug fit, you should only have to put it just up to or just a little past that first barb. Now this one, since it's a little bit looser, I do push it on farther. Now I'm going to put another picture here that a subscriber had sent to me because her brake bleeder hose was a little bit too big for her chamber fitting. And I mean, you know, we could buy a zillion different fittings, but it's not the fittings, it's the brake bleeder hoses that all change. So even if yours is too loose, there's ways around it you can make it fit. And she used the clamp. Again, the same thing. You're just going to pump this up until that needle stops moving, but you will notice a little more movement in this needle on when I'm using the chamber than when I'm using a Food Saver top. Just keep pumping until it stops moving. So in this case, I'm there. All right, so that should have worked. Gonna go ahead and take this off. Okay, and take the band off. I like to hold it just barely above the counter and pick it up, because if that lid comes off, you don't want it, you know, to drop it on the floor. But you can see that's very well sealed, and that's how I always test. And this is heavy because it's packed full of these figs, and it's actually a heavier jar, a lot heavier than something like this that's full of herbs. And then I do like to put the band on snugly after I vacuum sealed anything into my jars. All right, now let's go ahead and do this jar, and let's talk about some of the problems that you could be having that are going to have nothing to do with the pump or the chamber. Again, if you're able to get any kind of vacuum at all using the pump, and that needle is going up and it's not staying down here, if it's going up at all, then it's pumping the air out. And that also means that the chamber is working as it should, that it's well sealed. So the issue some people could be having with the recycled lids is, again, putting it on there too tight. I would say tighten the lid up the same as you would your canning jar lid, but if you go to pick the jar up and it doesn't, and the lid slips right off, then you might need to just tighten it a tiny bit more. But it shouldn't need to be more than that. Then again, carefully put this into your chamber. This is just that right height that when I first set this lid on there, you can see it kind of rocks because the bottom of this is actually setting on the lid. But when you tighten this down, this whole lid will shorten up and then there's no problem. So don't worry about that. If it's kind of just feels like it's just balanced on there, just start tightening it down and then make sure it's tight enough. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and pump this up and then just skip to when it's done. And it is sealed. I can tell because, again, just like this one, when I sealed it, the lid is slightly concave rather than flat. And if I try to turn it, see, before, these kind of lids, when they're not sealed, they're actually really easy to turn. And this is, I can't turn this very easily. Okay, so let's come back to some other things that we're going to talk about in making your brake bleeder be able to work with. Let's say you want to use the brake bleeder pump, but you want this tip on here so that you don't have to hold the tip like this into the top. If your Food Saver came with a hose like this, or maybe it has 2 gray ends, or whatever, if it's a separate accessory hose, and I know these are really hard to find, by the way, right now. It's hard to find. It used to be you could buy a bunch of these from foodsaver.com, and now apparently they're hard to find. I haven't actually personally looked, but if somebody knows where you can find these hoses, please post down below. Now, this might kind of freak some people out because I've been trying to keep this one whole for the sake of demonstration, because I don't use my Food Saver at all anymore. I did pull it out of the garbage can I had it in because I found I could get the pump to work for a little while, but then it quit working now too. So it's just garbage. I'm still keeping it so I can kind of study it and see how it's put together, and so I can find other ways for people to get it to work with various things. But at any rate, what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to cut this in half. So your typical Food Saver hose or other machine that vacuum seals is going to be a 6 mm, which is the outside diameter, OD, by a 4 mm, which is the inner diameter, also known as ID. So I'm going to just cut that right in half. Okay, and now I'm going to take this. This is a 10 mm OD by, which is outer diameter, by a 6.5 mm inner diameter, or ID. And I can do two different things. I can patch this back together if I ever need to use both ends at the same time by using that, and it works. You will have seen that when I was using this one, it's patched back together the other way around. It's two 10 millimeter hoses patched back together with a 6 millimeter hose. Okay, and that works. Okay, so I just opened up the calendula jar again, so I don't have to go get another jar. Again, put the Food Saver top on there. Now I'm coming back to this hose because it is slightly smaller. What I have found is with this brake bleeder hose, even though I can get it to work just fine on the chamber, but because it is a little bit looser than this one, the patch hose or the Food Saver hose like this fits too loosely inside the old one for it to get a good vacuum. But it fits nice and tightly inside this one here, and so that's not a problem. So in that case, I can take this Food Saver tip, which please be careful with those the tips on these. They break easily. That's why I ended up buying a bunch of these years ago, because I kept breaking them. And then just pump it up. That way now you have a free hand. You don't have to hold the tip in place like I normally would do. And also notice how I'm resting this against the counter and just pumping, using my whole arm, not having to rely on the strength of my hand alone to do the pumping. And there we go. And that was a lot faster, okay? Did you hear that when I pulled that out? That's pull the lid off. And again, I have a nicely sealed jar. Just to cover this again since I'm here, if you're wanting to use your brake bleeder, but you got the smaller size chamber that has the 6 mm barb on it, or fitting, then you do the same idea. You're going to take, you can have your little hose like this, and we do sell the little, though you can go buy them yourself. I recommend if you're going to go in person and buy it yourself, take whatever it is that you need so you can test it to make sure it's going to have a tight fit. But the measurements I gave you should be accurate, but sometimes even then you can order like that those hoses that we ordered online should have been the same exact size. In fact, it was from the same place, and for some reason some of them came in a little bit bigger and were fitting too loosely on this fitting here, which was weird. But anyway, you can reverse that whole idea and convert your one with the smaller fitting to fit with your brake bleeder hose, so that way, either way, whichever one you get, you can convert it to work with either or, and that way you can have both. So if it's too hard for you to use the brake bleeder pump, but you like the idea of having options in case you lose power and you can't run the electric machine, then you can fall back on your brake bleeder pump by just putting the adapter hoses, what we're calling these little 4-inch pieces. And then it's not going to fit on here because this is, I don't have any of the smaller ones available to demonstrate on, but then this will just slip onto that fitting, and then you can use your brake bleeder pump that way. So if you're watching this about the chamber and you're going to order one, make sure if you're wanting to, if you already have a brake bleeder kit, you shouldn't really have to buy the hose like this. You should already have a 4-inch hose that came with your kit that will fit onto your 10 millimeter fitting here. But if you're just wanting some backup ones, yes, we offer this size, and we also offer the 6 millimeter. Make sure that the number of the size number of the hose matches the size number of the chamber. So 10 mm chamber, 10 mm adapter hose. 6 mm chamber, 6 mm adapter hose. Some people who might have got the smaller size, the 6 mm chamber, are buying intentionally the 10 mm hose so that if they cut their hose in half, they can patch it back together when they need it like that. So let's say I want to use this with a Food Saver pump and a lid like this, I just patch it back together, no big deal. It's all taken care of. So there's so many different ways you can make this work. So mostly what I was trying to show you was some different options with your brake bleeder pump, and try to cover some of the issues people are having when they're buying these pumps. I'm hoping I answered all the questions there and covered some of the issues on getting your brake bleeder pump to work with both the food saver tops and your vacuum chamber, whether it be this one or another totally different one, or one that you've made yourself. And one more thing I want to add is, if you're someone who's had different issues, no matter what they are, and getting different things to seal, whether it be working with the chamber, working with an issue with your lids, an issue with your jars, an issue with your hoses, or your brake bleeder pumps, and you found a solution that made it work for you, please share it with us down below so other people who are having some of these other issues can read through your comments and find the comment that suits them, so they can try that and see if it's working to solve the problems that they are having, so we can keep helping each other out, so that we can all keep putting up food for long-term storage. All right, well, thanks for watching. Take care and God bless.